Welcome back to another great episode of the Adam Talks podcast.
I started out as a wrestler, 10 years Olympic style. So I started when I was about 9 or so.
We said we don't want Bruce Wayne to be old and that's his reason for retiring. He has to have a reason to not be doing this.
I knew I'd always wanted to do it. I never saw myself at a desk job, and anytime I thought of something else, it always brought me back to wrestling.
Man, I don't like fancy pad work. I like realistic pad work. Am I formed? Am I punching correctly? Am I balanced? Like, a lot of them guys will hold pads way outside their faces, and it's just, I don't believe in that type of training, man. Like,
for a couple promotions, I wrestled under a mask, and we don't talk about those days. Because those days were fun and really embarrassing.
It is the first annual Berryville Film Festival. I'm the founder and festival director for it. So it's exciting to bring something to a small town, something brand new.
I think anything you do in wrestling has to have meaning to it. No matter, like, facial expressions, the high-flying moves, all that stuff like that.
We're back with another great one. This is awesome. Second week in a row with a comic book company owner, a guy that runs the show for Gen Comics. We have Evan Davis here, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, glad to be on. Thank you very much, Adam.
Yeah, man, definitely. How did you get into comics? Like, was it something that you got into when you were a kid, or was it something you found you loved a little bit more into your teen years? How did you get into it?
So it's actually quite a bit of a sappy story, I gotta admit. But basically what it was that my mom's best friend at the time, who would later become my co-dad, he brought me to see the very first Spider-Man movie. Way back in 2002 with Tobey Maguire, directed by Sam Raimi, Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, all that stuff. Now, I was aware of superheroes and comics before, but I didn't really get into them then. But he thought that it would be a good idea for me to go ahead and see Spider-Man because, I'm a nerd, and my future co-dad thought it would be actually good for me to see a superhero who was a person who was just like me, because I was getting bullied in school all the time. So that changed everything. Absolutely everything for me. I was already an artist at the time, just drawing whatever. And then after that, I got subscriptions for Ultimate and Amazing Spider-Man for Marvel for almost 10 years just going on until college and whatnot. But I was reading comics. I was working on my own comic just all throughout my middle high school years. Took a break during college and a couple of years after I graduated. And then I found out that Stan Lee was going to be in Kansas City. I want to say it was 2015 or 2016 whenever I found out about that. And I was like, this is my one chance to actually meet the legend, get an autograph. And I took it. And whenever that happened, I was able to meet all sorts of other comic book creators, several whose works that I had actually read to help me through architecture school. And that just revived my interest in wanting to pretty much revive a childhood dream of mine and a couple of friends, which was Gen Comics.
So Sam Raimi's Spider-Man's what really got you into comics. For me, it came way later. I loved Batman. My uncle introduced me to the '66 Batman when I was 8 years old or something. So that would have been 98. Yeah, that would have been 98 or something whenever he was introducing me to that stuff. So I was like, this is so cool, because it was cartoony and stuff, and I was a little kid. Yeah. And then the next time I was like, can I watch that Batman movie? And he showed me a Michael Keaton when I was like, this is not my Batman. What is happening here, It was completely different, And then years went by. It was X-Men in 2000, I think. And then it was Spider-Man, like you said. And I didn't really get into comics until way later, but dude, I fell in love hard with them. You know, and I'm guessing it was the same for you, like you said, the 10-year subscription, getting those Spider-Man comics and stuff. You said you were an artist before. Was your character designs very comic book-esque, or were they more cartoon-like, kind of like we saw in the Kaiju Days comics?
So very, very, very comic book-like. So, and the reason why is because, like, there was one artist in particular who was my biggest inspiration, and still to this day is a hero of mine, and his name is Mark Bagley. So Mark Bagley was pretty much is one of the most prolific artists for the Spider-Man comics. Basically, like toe to toe with John Romita Jr. And yeah, and between the two of them, they actually like exceeded past John Romita Sr., who had worked on the Amazing Spider-Man comics throughout the late 60s to mid 70s, I want to say. So, and Mark Bagley has this style that is very organic. It's very much captures movement. So, I was actually like into nature photography at the time whenever I was starting to read Ultimate Spider-Man. And there's beautiful pictures that captures animals and nature and all that stuff, you know, like still in the moment of where they're like moving incredibly fast, and yet it's just a still image. And so you can see like all of the little waves, the little contours, the folds and everything else, the things that you don't normally see. And I absolutely love that because I grew up on like Wild Discovery Channel. And since I drew animals all the time whenever I was a kid, like dinosaurs, tigers, sharks, gators, that kind of stuff, it was a style that flowed very, very naturally for me. So I ended up adopting that. So, but you bring up like Kaiju Days. Kaiju Days is interesting. Kaiju Days is a comic that I was the editor for and the publisher for. But Kaiju Days was originally going to be pitched as an animated series. It very much in the style of Saturday morning cartoons. And so whenever they were developing the pitch Bible for it, they actually got the creator for Kaiju Days, Robert Livingston. He was able to get an actual professional animator to update the designs that were already going to be based for a comic book and make it more geared towards animation. Now, this was going on, I want to say, like 2018, 2019, whenever he was first starting to do this. And then around that time was when basically the animation industry kind of had a major falter. And so Kaiju Days as an animated series pretty much like fell through the cracks as a result. And rather than just letting it go to waste, I was like, hey man, look, like you're wanting to go ahead. You've been like working hard to develop this pitch Bible for Kaiju Days to pretty much present to studios. You know what would actually work even better? An actual series of comics. And so from that, we basically took what was going to be the script for the pilot episode and we adapted it for the first issue that you read.
Man, it was just something reading. It was, like you said, a Saturday morning cartoon, essentially. This mom kaiju, this mom, like, friggin', yeah, kaiju is the best word I guess you could say for it. Trying to teach her kids how to tear these cities apart, and they're not doing it in the right amount of time. But then there's the golden child, the son, And it was just like, wow, what the heck? And then there's an aunt that comes in that's like a praying mantis, and she's like, here's you some money. Go take care of this. I need to talk to your mom. And it's like a cartoon, man. It's something that you would see on Cartoon Network or Fox Kids or something like that back in the day, you know? So it's something like that, and I appreciated the comedy and the cartoon element of it, because you don't see that in comics a lot. You know, there's a lot of edginess, there's a lot of grittiness in comics, and this doesn't take itself too seriously, which is really refreshing and unique in a different way. What you said it was a show pitched at first, and then you pitched for it to be a comic?
Yeah, so basically me and Robert Livingston, we actually met on an online comic community. That's how we had met. And he had initially, like, this was initially going to be a comic that was going to be more of a kind of political satire. It was going to be edgy and all this, because he was very much influenced by Kaiju Max at the time. But as he was working on it and, you know, election season was going on, he was like, I kind of want to go ahead and take a different direction with this. And he already had experience with action comedy through another one of the comics that he's currently producing, Tom and Artie, which I highly recommend checking out. It's great. And so he was like, okay, what is something that is not going on in the kaiju community right now? And it was comedy. So comedy is something that is very, very rare in the kaiju franchises and the genre. Like, we have like pop action that's kind of silly and ridiculous, like Pacific Rim, for example. But in terms of like a straight up, like, family friendly comedy that everyone can kind of really get into, there wasn't really anything like it. And the real point of inspiration for Robert, and you mentioned like Fox, the show that inspired him, in terms of like the family comedy aspect, was Dinosaurs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, which, for anyone who hasn't watched or even heard of this show, it was just a spectacular work of production. Like, it was basically an entire cast of like a dinosaur family, live action, just people in suits, some of the most cutting edge animatronics and puppetry of, I want to say, like early to mid 90s, about like basically what if dinosaurs had like suburban living and whatnot. And it was utterly fantastic. And it was a pretty short-lived series. I think it was only maybe 2 or 3 seasons, but even then, it still leaves like an impact, because there's literally been no other show like it ever. And so pretty much seeing that, hey, Dinosaurs was a success. It's garnered a cult following, and it's very much like the leap from like dinosaurs to kaiju is not that big of a leap. That is what Robert decided to go ahead and go for, with Kaiju Days. And it was just like, whenever he had pitched this to me, I was just like, oh my gosh, we gotta do this, man. I am backing you up 100%. I am putting my money down on this to help you make it into a comic. And since I was already starting my own publishing company and actually got some experience through self-publishing, I was like, hey, I actually know a thing or two about how to go ahead and like the legal aspect of protecting a comic and copyright, the economics of pretty much getting them printed. I'm already going out to conventions. I'm developing my sales personality. let's do this. And so he very much signed up with me, and I'm very grateful for that.
And it works. I mean, it works at the end of the day. It is unique in several different ways. Like you said, this is the only that I could think of. And like you said, this is one of the only things that I could think of that includes elements of kaijus and comedy. I mean, when do you get that? You don't. But not only that, it's not even a show. It's a comic book. That's a whole nother element that you just don't ever see. You know, if you see kaijus in comic books, they're terrorizing a city. It's showing from the ground view of the comic, looking up at this scary monster, or it's showing the military aspect flying by them, trying to drop bombs on them or something. But you don't see the kaiju for being like a parent or being like a kid kaiju, like trying to learn how to destroy a city or whatever, you know. You don't see that. You never see that kind of stuff. It's just unique, and it's, like I said earlier, it's refreshing to see that sort of twist on this genre and this style. Getting a little bit outside of kaiju days.
Yeah, that's fine.
Gen Comics, man. What kind of different stories can we expect? More of the same style like that? Or are there going to be more edgy stuff that we're going to be able to see in the future? Is it going to be because I know the Serpent Spectre, I have not got the chance to check out. You sent it to me, and I haven't yet got the chance to check it out, but I am definitely going to. And like I said, I'll let you know about it. But what else can we expect from Gen Comics? What are we working on? What can we see in the future?
So you brought up in Gen Comics, Serpent Spectre. So Serpent Spectre is an edgier story. It is a story. It is a story that takes place in a verdant, a green post-apocalypse. And oh my goodness gracious, Belladonna, are you just going ahead and wanting to be part of the interview? I apologize.
That's perfectly fine. No, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It's perfectly fine, man.
So, Serpent Spectre, it takes place in a green post-apocalypse. But the thing is that humanity is gone. Like, humanity, our civilizations, like, so much of our history, so much of the things about, like, us, we're gone. But humanity has left behind a world that's filled with all sorts of wild and crazy creations. They have used genetic engineering in order to recreate mythical creatures. They have made certain kinds of animals sapient for them to have, like, kept at pets at one time. They have, like, all sorts of, like, robotic industries and assembly lines. So if you've ever played, like, Horizon Zero Dawn, very much inspired by that. But with humanity gone, all of those are without their creators, without their control. And as time has gone on, new civilizations have kind of arisen in their absence as these sapient animals have pretty much come to their own self-awareness, developing their own cultures and their own rivalries, which is where Serpent Spectre comes in, because one of the things about the superhero genre that is a kind of part of not just like my personal philosophy, but also an integral part of the genre, is that superheroes exist as pretty much problem solvers. If you look at the history of superhero comics, it's no surprise that they became very big during a time of pretty much social strife, poverty, government corruption. You couldn't rely on law enforcement in order to, like, solve a crime because they were being paid off by the mob. So who could you turn to in order to pretty much, like, fight for truth and justice? That's where superheroes came in. And they fit in very, very well within the kind of organic nature of folklore that pretty much gave rise to a lot of our myths, a lot of our legends. And so the idea of, okay, one of the problems with the superhero genre right now is is keeping superheroes relevant within our modern society. And in trying to kind of like work that out, because I spent years trying to work out like how to make a superhero story relevant, and like not simply like relevant but also new and interesting. The conclusion that I came to is that get rid of humans. Like, just get rid of humans entirely and have it to where the next generation of superheroes that's inspired by these post-human cultures arises because there is a desperate need for that kind of security, justice, fighting for what's fair, and fighting to survive. In very much the same way that, minor gods were invented and worshipped. And so that is kind of the idea that I'm coming from with Serpent Spectre, that here is a world without humanity, without any concept of like law or justice or civilization, to where it's literally like survival of blood, tooth, and claw. And you have these groups that are very much on the verge of bringing civilization back, but they need like that last push in order to do it, in order to overcome the last bit of violence that would actually like keep that progress down. And lo and behold, you get your first post-human superhero. And that is what Serpent Spectre is meant to represent.
Okay. Completely unique view on stuff, man. That's something that I'm liking about about your comics, dude, because like I said with Kaiju Days, completely unique. That is a completely unique idea and concept of the superhero genre that I would never thought of. Was it difficult? Like, how long does it take normally to formulate these ideas, to come up with either a story or a character or even just the world that they live in?
I have literally been working on different iterations of Serpent Spectre for about 20 years. Like, it started off as very much a traditional superhero comic in the style of like Ultimate Spider-Man and Batman, way back whenever it was called Dragon Raider. But as I like started to read more and kind of grow up, and as I grew up along with the industry, because I was literally part of like, I got into superhero comics just before they got big again, because of Spider-Man, because of X-Men, because of the MCU, because of Batman Begins and that whole trilogy. Like, as I was developing as an artist and as a storyteller, as the rest of the industry was. And with that, there was like, new inspirations, new ways of trying to work on the story. And I just got to a point to where I was like, I want to do something that is my own, something that isn't derivative, something that is not inspired directly by something. And that's kind of where, as an artist, you start to mature, is discovering like what your own voice is. And so for like me, for Serpent Spectre, it takes a long time. Kaiju Days, on the other hand, is a completely different story, because like that started off for Robert. He came up with the concept, I want to say like 2015, 2016, whenever it was going to be called President Kaiju. And then later on 2016 and then 2017, that's whenever it started to become Kaiju Days. And then several years of just working on character concepts, posting short comics, just years of doing that, until we actually took the pilot episode script. I want to say it was 2022 whenever we start to take that script and actually make it into a comic. And all of us, we're not doing this full time. So we're like me, Robert, and everyone who was working on that. We were working on this in what little free time that we had in our days. So consequently, because of that, here was a 34-page comic that took us about a year and a half to actually like finish. But we did it. And so we're getting into the process now to where it's like, okay, now that we've actually finished that issue, let's go ahead and start working on the script for the next issue. And that can sometimes take a couple of months because we're trying to, or we have like so many different ideas about the stories that we want to tell. And we are very much in a time when like the shows that we watch, the movies and everything else is just like so full of Easter eggs and so full of like little plot threads that get seeded and all this kind of stuff. And so we're very, very tempted to try to cram as many different ideas into a single story as possible. And what happens is that it becomes overstuffed, it becomes unfocused. And that's actually where me as an editor comes in, to where I'm having to tell our creative team, hey, we kind of need to focus on one self-contained kind of episodic story. Like, if we focus on doing a good episodic comic one at a time, then that will build up into a series. It's kind of like how Movie Bob puts the MCU. You don't make movies, you don't, how to exactly put, basically, the promise of a franchise comes from first having good movies. You don't make movies to promise a franchise, you make good movies, and that leads into one. If the movie is not good, then the promise of a franchise is actually like very, very sour. We've kind of seen how that's turned out with so many people trying to like hop on the superhero train. A lot of failed projects because they were thinking so big picture that they didn't focus on just doing a good job. And so that's very much the philosophy behind Gen Comics. You know, we're not a comic book sweatshop. We want to work at a pace that is comfortable for our creators, and we want to help our creators make the best stories, characters that they possibly can. And if that means giving them the time that they need to like let ideas gel and let them kind of work on a couple of other projects so that they can kind of cool down a bit, then we give them that freedom to do so. And so
definitely.
Yeah. So it very much depends on the creators. You know, some creators need a long time. Others are just like rapid, like they're straight up professionals.
So from your personal experience, like before you started doing, like before you had the idea for Gen Comics or anything like that, when you were drawing, I'm sure you doodled your own ideas for different characters, had multiple different ideas for, oh, this guy flies, or this guy's super fast, or this guy's got spider webs, or whatever, you know. Just a whole bunch of different random stuff as being a young artist and working on things and having a love for comic books. How do you formulate an idea and make it what it's going to become ultimately? I know that takes a bunch of time, like you just kind of said in a roundabout way, but how do you really form an idea for a character and know when it's right and ready?
So, there's a great anecdote that I have for that, because as part of like my own development, I wanted to like, you know, improve as a storyteller. And one of the things that I noticed about that's very strong about comics, and like a lot of media that very much stands the test of time is that there is like a formula. And it's a formula that's very much episodic, but it is, even though there's like a structure to the formula, there's all sorts of variables that you put into it in order to get a different result. And I know that I'm using mathematic terminology here, but it's, it's literally called a formula. So I wanted to go ahead and kind of get a better understanding of how formulas actually worked. And so I actually turned to, in my opinion, quite possibly the best example of formulaic episodic television that you could possibly see. And that is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And Avatar: The Last Airbender is great because it is episodic series, 3 seasons, lots of episodes, very, very well structured, but it has very much like one idea that's at the center of pretty much the entire story, and that is literally like Aang himself and his growth in accepting his role as the Avatar, which was something that he rejects. And why does he reject it? Because of war. He's a pacifist. So you literally have like one character whose personal growth is tied in with the larger conflict of the worlds that he and everyone else is in. And so whenever you're coming up with the idea for a story that you can constantly like come back to, it's finding that like core loop that you're constantly able to return to where everything around it is related in some way. And you can look at it thematically, like the pretty much contrast between like a war, like a society that's built around war versus one that's built around peace. You can look at it from the perspective of the warriors, the soldiers, and their victims, but also seeing how those soldiers could be victims themselves because of their own culture. And like the central character Aang actually coming to understand that and use that as a way to actually like start to form a connection with even some of his biggest rivals and enemies. So that is like how you're able to do that. And by having that, you can have characters represent these different ideas. You can have these themes and these conflicts actually explored in like different episodes. And that helps to make each episode focus. It helps to give the characters focus. It helps to give their developments, and whether it's in the plot or in the characters, helps to give them their trajectory and momentum. It's literally like a snowball. You just start small, but as you're like rolling it along, like at first you're having to push it yourself, but eventually it gets to the point to where it starts to roll on its own. And that's where you want to get to creatively, is whenever it just keeps on making itself.
Right. Okay. So it's all about perspective. It's about different perspectives and who's, like you said, you could see it from the point of view where these people are just blowing stuff up. They're destroying everything. But then that's taking a view from the people whose stuff is getting blown up. But then you look at the people who are doing it, and some of them inside whatever army or whatever is doing this, some of them are like, yeah, we're supposed to do this. And then others are like, why are we even doing this? They haven't done anything wrong. I don't understand this. You know, you can look at it from those two perspectives. You can look at it from a complete outsider's perspective that has nothing to do with the situation, and is like, this is what the world has come to, war. You know, I can understand that, and different perspectives make different different stories, different elements. They give it different context and feeling, and I can see how that would help make very compelling stories. You know, how difficult is it to come up with an original concept? Because, like you said way earlier, that you didn't want to have something that was like a mimic or a shadow of something else. You wanted Serpent Spectre to be completely original. How do you come up with an original concept, like all original? Because that is a concept, the way you explained it, that I have never thought of. You know, the humans are completely gone, and you just have these semi-mutated or transformed animals into sapiens. That's the word.
Yeah. I like to call them Faunican or Quasi. I kind of alternate between the two in my head. So the thing about originality is that there's no such thing as originality. What we think of as being original ideas are actually, more than anything else, just very, very well researched and have like a very like specific or carefully considered perspective. So, for example, like I had mentioned all that about like Serpent Spectre, but the thing is that we have so much media of where there are no humans whatsoever. Hello, Belladonna. There are no humans whatsoever in the story, and yet they're still able to tell very human stories. So you don't need literal physical humanity in order to represent these ideas, these feelings, these emotions, these conflicts. And that is very much like what I'm pretty much trying to tap into, because those are ultimately, a lot of those stories are very much geared towards children, yes, but those are also some of the most mature stories. Like, think about an American Tale. Like, humans are just like background. They're almost like completely not, almost entirely not involved in the story whatsoever. They're pretty much like as unintrusive as a tree, basically. So this entire story is pretty much told from the perspective of the little mice, the cats, the birds, all these other small animals. And yet we're still able to get the same emotion of dread, of sadness, of depression, abandonment, and even like ultimately ending up in victory. Like, yes, we've actually finally done it. And so it's like, if you can do that with like small, like, if you can do that with animals and pretty much like children cartoons and whatnot, then you can perfectly do it with and a superhero comic. And it's no surprise that there's several superheroes and also mostly supervillains that are very much inspired by, like, based on animals. All right, are you wanting to cuddle? Come here. All right. And so basically I just went ahead and took that of, I'm just going to go ahead, combine something that's like an American Tale and make it a post-apocalyptic superhero. And taking a lot of the similar kinds of tropes with the superhero genre and the post-apocalyptic genre, which turns out there's a lot of very much similarities, like, warlord equals mob boss, basically. Like war boys from Mad Max, those are basically like minions of Immortan Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like you find the similarities through kind of a study of the genre, find those parallels, tie them together, and that's how you're able to pretty much come up with a quote unquote original idea. Most ideas are just a combination of other existing ideas in a way that just hasn't really been done before, or the last time that it was done badly.
I know that going into these cons and stuff must be incredibly rewarding, but at the same time, doing what you're doing, there has to be some sort of stress in it. I know you said you want to keep it very stress free in your stuff, as far as giving the people that are making the stuff time to come up with their ideas if they need it and everything. But running Gen Comics and having to plan all this stuff and everything must be really stressful. How do you deal with the stress, and if there is any anxiety to it, how do you deal with that?
It is very stressful because I can tell you that, you know, being a publisher and being a creator at the same time is very, very difficult because there is so much that goes into the actual business of comic book publication. Like, and this was actually something that, you know, I very much wanted to go ahead and engage in because the webcomic community that Robert and I were part of, they actually wanted to go into publishing, which kind of aligned with literally my childhood dream. Like, Gen Comics is literally a name that me and my friend came up with way back in, like, I want to say 2003, 2004. So, and we kept the name going. Like, we even kept the fact that it ended in the X and that there's a DNA helix that's part of the logo. Not necessarily this design, but very much like the idea behind like the next generation of heroes, humans, and villains.
Okay.
So, but the thing is, like, there's a huge difference between creating comic and actually like publishing it. And that's where you have a lot of comic creators and a lot of artists in general who are worried about copyright, having their stuff stolen, not being able to do anything about it. And it's like there are, like, Marvel and DC are able to do it. Image is able to do it. Several other companies are able to do it. So clearly there's a means to do that. But that also involves like talking with lawyers. Pretty much trying to get funding so that I'm able to pay for these artists means having to talk with banks, having to talk with lenders and creditors, going to these small business entrepreneur events in order to pretty much like find someone who's willing to give money. And I can go ahead and tell you, I've had no success in that. Gen Comics is almost entirely self-funded, like coming out of my own pocket. We had one very successful Kickstarter for Kaiju Days last year. Very, very thankful for that because that was able to fund not just the printing of the comics, but also their distribution as well, which is great. But that's also the thing. It's like Kickstarter is a model to where it's basically like one and done, and if you want to be able to really benefit from Kickstarter for future, you're constantly having to put stuff out. You need to have at least 1 or 2 Kickstarters a year for you to really be able to do that, and it's genuinely not a very sustainable model. So you're having to look at other ways to be able to get money in order to pretty much like pay the creative staff, which, you know, for Serpent Spectre, because I'm the artist, the writer, everything for it, like there's no cost for that. But Kaiju Days does have artists who rely on being paid for their time and effort and making sure that they get the money for their work, and with like such limited funds, that is very stressful on top of, just, trying to live. And so you're having to look into like different strategies, different ways to do it. It's like crowdfunding is an option, but crowdfunding also requires like a bunch of like regular output that our model doesn't really support. Doesn't really support. And so we're having to look at potentially investments, like a way to generate passive income so that we do have the cash flow, like the regular cash flow in order to pay everyone, but that also takes time. And it's just like, and that's not even including the conventions themselves, because you're having to pay for a booth, you're having to travel, you're having to like reserve hotels like months ahead of time, and you got to make sure that all that stuff is pretty much like covered so that whenever you pretty much come, no matter how conventions turn out, you still have some money left in your bank in order to go ahead and pay bills and buy food. Because thing is like conventions are hit and miss. You know, you have some conventions to where you do really well and you actually come out with a profit. Others you don't. And it's often for reasons that are completely out of your control, like change of venue, change of management, change in the way that they've pretty much laid out their laid out the convention floor. There's so many different variables that are working against you. So, and you were asking about like, well, what do I do in order to pretty much take the edge off of all this stress? Like, I play video games. I'm very much a generalist whenever it comes to knowledge. So I'm watching all sorts of documentary material, whether it's on like animals, paleontology, scientific developments, war, history, just like kind of absorbing all that stuff as a form of kind of like as a form of enrichment, and also like a healthy distraction to pretty much like kind of relax. I also participate in tabletop role playing, which is a great opportunity to also exercise some creativity, because I'm literally having to get into the mindset of a character and actually playing that out. And if I can do that in a role playing setting, I can do that in a writing setting as well. And then just, you know, the conventions themselves. Conventions are a great way to meet people. That's how we met. It's pretty much like what led to this. It's what led to this. There is actually a local like comic book legend here in Kansas City, named Kyle Strom. He's been in the business for 25 years, and if you haven't followed him on Threads, I highly recommend it. But he's been giving some very, very good advice, and one of them is that conventions are a great opportunity for you to network and meet people and learn about the trade from other people in the trade that you normally would not ever be able to meet on the street or otherwise. And so even though it's like you kind of have to go in with the mindset of, okay, I'm probably not going to be coming out of this convention with profit, with like monetary profit, but it is setting things up to where I am building relationships and connections that so long as I keep on top of it, keep those relationships nurturing, and keep that exchange of knowledge going, it will eventually result in growth, both personally and financially.
I mean, I don't know how you do what you do, man. It seems super complicated, super strenuous, and super fun at times, honestly. It seems like it would be a dream come true, getting to live a dream, you know? You want to be you wanted to make comic books since you saw the Sam Raimi movies and stuff, and now you're getting to actually do it. But apart from that, even, you got Gen Comics, something that you and your buddy made up years ago, that you're getting to publish it with, which is so cool, man. What is some of the more proud things? Like, what are some of the things you're super proud of what are some of the super things that you're super proud of within Gen Comics or within your career as a whole as a comic book creator?
Literally getting Kaiju Days on some shelves, on some like actual comic book store shelves. There's three comic shops in Kansas City where we are selling Kaiju Days, and
Wow.
they're not like selling a lot because um honestly, like new releases are pretty much a tough sell now, are tough sell nowadays, and that's all across the industry. But the thing is that Robert has never had Robert had been in comics for like years in web comics. He never had anything published, and he had something that was sold, but nothing that he had pitched was ever taken up by a publisher. Um, there are the line artist for Kaiju Days, Ninja Haku. She's never had one of her works actually on a shelf, and so whenever Robert was here for Planet Comic Con and he got to see people buying his book and he got to see his book on a shelf and sharing that on social media and Ninja actually retweeting that and saying and being so overjoyed that after years of doing art, after years of doing like her own comic stuff and doing work for other comic creators on the side, she finally had something that was on shelves. She finally had something that was being sold with like her name on it. And that's very much like what the goal of Gen Comics is. We look for people who are very much committed, who want to really get their foot in the door that for one reason or another they haven't. And so we want to give them that chance by providing them with the infrastructure and support that they need. Like right now, Kaiju Days has a website, and that was a website that I made myself that I'm constantly updating. And right now, I'm actually working on a new store page for Gen Comics using Shopify, so that we're able to get into international marketing or into international markets, getting the shipping discounts that we sorely need in order to be able to deliver to more people, folks that weren't able to buy our stuff because the merchant that we were using, their shipping address calculator sucked. And so me being able to do all that stuff so that folks who thought they would never have the chance can actually see their dream come true by me living my dream. That is a great moment.
I just want to say I appreciate you coming on this show, man. We're getting a little short on time, but I did want to ask as well. We got Kaiju Days, we got Serpent Spectre. Is there any other hero comics? Is there any other kinds of comics coming down the pipeline in the future for Gen Comics?
So there are a couple of people that I am in touch with that I'm currently working things out contractually to publish. And right now we're focusing on a diversity of titles, diversity of genres. So it's not all action comedy. It's not all superhero stuff. We're looking into like supernatural young adults. We're looking into like pretty much like child driven shonen. There's one comic right now that I'm currently working things out with, to where it's literally a father-son team, where the father, who's an actual comic artist and has worked on other books, is working on a story that's inspired by his 5-year-old son, that he literally like collaborates with for dialogue, action scenes, like story beats, and all sorts of silly stuff.
Wow.
And consequently, because of it, it is a genuine joy, because it's like it never turns out the way that you think it is, because you are looking at you're looking at something that is also inspired by the mind of a child. And so it's just like all sorts of like wacky fun. And yet again, there's also another story right there of like, hey, here's a story where the kid looks and sounds like a kid because the co-creator is a literal kid. And so it's like yeah. And so we're constantly looking for a diversity of titles, and our goal is ultimately to get to where we have enough titles to where we can be self-sustaining in terms of sales, in terms of output. And that's ultimately our goal. And honestly, like whenever I had started all this last year, trying to publish other people's works, I made a lot of mistakes along the way. But a lot of that just comes down to like not knowing enough. But now that I've learned those lessons, I'm trying to do my absolute best to pretty much, bring myself up and bring a lot of others with me. That's the hope. That's the dream.
Awesome, man. So normally the way we end the show is, because I'm a very big person about gratefulness, being grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super grateful, dude, for all kinds of different things. So what I usually do is I'll say 3 things I'm grateful for, and I'll let my guests say 3 things that they're grateful for. And that's how we end the show usually. So for me, it doesn't change that often. It's the first one is my support system, my beautiful wife, my 2 beautiful daughters, my family, my friends, everybody that's supported me, whether it's music, whether it's the podcast, audio dramas, whatever it might be that I'm doing, pro wrestling. My support system is number 1. They're really huge to me, and I couldn't do anything without them. Number 2 is, well, you guys, because you guys don't have to come on here. I'm just some dude that likes talking to people. You have no reason to be on here. So I'm very grateful that you guys would come on here. Any of my guests would come on here. It means the world to me. And number 3 is kind of a twofer. My health and the good Lord above. Because without God, nothing's possible. And with Him, everything is possible. And because I just recently had my first asthmatic asthma attack, big asthmatic thing, a couple days ago as of the time of recording, and I hadn't had one of those in nearly 20 years, so I was not prepared. I had to go to the ER for it and all kinds of stuff, but now I'm fixed up. My health is great. My mental health is great. Those are things that I'm very grateful for in this world in my life. Evan, what are 3 things that you are grateful for in this moment?
I know these are going to be like pretty random, but I am, and maybe very specific, I am grateful for my education, because like I was also like pretty much a scrub from a tiny town in Arkansas, and yet because of the great education that I had gotten from my teachers, from the schools that I had gone to, and eventually going on to college, which, I went to architecture school instead of comics, but even then I got to go to places that no one else in my family did. And because of that, the things that I had learned in terms of ways to think, ways to research, how to see things from different perspectives, and the discipline that it takes in order to actually fulfill projects and being able to deliver on them. Those are things that were very much deeply embedded in me, and I'm especially grateful for that, because it's not only benefited me, it's also benefiting everyone else that I'm able to use that to help with. Second thing I'm grateful for is my family, because like even those, like, there are things about me, like I'm the only artist in my family. I'm the only one who actually like went to kind of an art oriented school. I'm the only one who's like really into comics and whatnot. And this was like, throughout a very, very interesting time, especially whenever it came to like children's mental health. No one really knew what to do with me, but they nevertheless supported me. They nevertheless loved me. They nevertheless helped me to get where they felt that I needed to be, which is how I ended up here. It's how I ended up graduating from one of the best architecture schools in the country. And because of that, I am doing well enough to where I can help fund this and help other people's dreams come true. But the third thing that I am grateful for is that I still have hope. And I know like that's not so much like an external thing, it's very much an internal thing, but the fact of the matter is that, you're right. You're pretty much like, it sounds like a lot. It sounds like very strenuous. And the truth is, it is. It is extremely strenuous. It is extremely stressful. And there are so many people, myself included, who get overwhelmed with the stress, with the dread of pretty much the fear of failure, of being taken advantage of thinking that you have the support of people that, you had come to accept as friends at one point, and then whenever you really needed their support and understanding, that they weren't there for you and pretty much leave you behind. And it's so important to be able to maintain that hope from within, because if you yourself, like, even if everything's just like falling apart, if you still believe that all of this, like everything that you're going through, and this is something that you have to feel for yourself, is worth it, that it's worth that's worth the struggle, it's worth the hardship, then that will keep you going through a long way. And I would not be where I am if I did not have that sense of hope keeping me going to where I am living my dream. And I'm helping others live theirs too.
Awesome, man. Three things definitely worth being grateful for. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Evan. Hey, man, if there's any social media or anywhere they can find you or Gen Comics, where would that be?
All right, so we do have a couple of social media, and we've also got websites. You can go ahead and check out Gen Comics at gencomics.com. From there, we have links to all of our social media. And from there, you can also go to Kaiju Days, and there's a crew page on there to where you can check out the social media of the creators as well. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Ronan de Vamas, all one word. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
All right, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've had a great time on here with you. Thank you so much for stopping by, man.
Thank you very much for having me.
Come join the fun.